We're the two teachers.
Where school is always in session.
Woo! Is this an important topic? We're talking about the U.S. president. Andy, unlike any time in my lifetime, this president, Donald Trump, every day is trying to hold our hand. It's time we learn about what the president should be doing, what he is doing, and whether or not he can do it.
Okay, Dan, we can start with that by one explaining that when we talk about the presidency, we're talking about the executive branch of government, which is always an essential branch, but particularly in a time of policy changes and implementing policies, or maybe policies that should have been implemented, we can really look to that executive branch to see what their number one job with the law is, to enforce the law and implement that. And we know over the course of the history of our constitutional republic, this really has changed, and the president's power to shape the enforcement of law has grown enormously and much more flexible than maybe what the founders originally intended.
Well, Andy, I hate to be the skunk at the garden party, but when I open up my pocket constitution this morning for my daily devotional, I noticed that the formal powers of president aren't very impressive. A lot of little formalities dealing with foreign policy, a point here, a point there, but those formal powers look to be a weak president. Then I turn on my news and our current president says, I'm the president. I can do whatever I want. Seemingly the informal powers have trumped the Constitution. No pun intended.
Well, we can also look to that Federalist Alexander Hamilton and the Federalist paper that he wrote, Federalist 70, where he articulates kind of his vision for this expanded power of the presidency, expanded beyond the words of the Constitution that we seem to debate every day when it comes to proclamations that President Trump says he can make related to coronavirus policies. And remember, Federalist 70, the key words were energetic executive, that Hamilton envisioned a president who could use powers beyond what was listed in the Constitution. And certainly we've seen, no matter who is president, no matter which party is president, in modern days, we've seen those powers, those energetic powers, if you will, institutionalize, so that any person who controls the executive branch has enormous power to use executive orders to tell the bureaucracy how to implement the laws, yes, that Congress wrote, but Congress oftentimes gives enormous flexibility to the executive branch into how those laws are implemented.
Well, we know there are checks, right? The 22nd Amendment checks the president to 2 terms. Woo! We know that the Senate has to approve, confirm presidential appointments. But Andy, with that bully pulpit, with that ability to get to the microphone and set agendas, presidents today, with their bargaining, have tremendous amounts of power. How can they be checked?
Well, certainly you're getting into what we call the roles of the presidency, and the bully pulpit fits a lot of different roles that the president has. We know some of those roles are articulated in the Constitution. Sometimes we call them formal powers or formal roles, like commander-in-chief in charge of directing the armed forces, like the chief diplomat, where the president has the power to nominate ambassadors, to draft treaties with foreign countries. We know that the president's, in the Constitution, the head of state, in terms of that ceremonial role, where the Constitution says the president has to give a State of the Union address. But we know, particularly in that ceremonial role as head of state, and in that formal role, the chief executive, we know that with modern communication, presidents for over 100 years have used that modern communication to speak, in some cases, directly to the American people in a way to shape public opinion, to build support for those policies that the president prefers. And that's certainly what we have called for 100 years the bully pulpit, and an informal power.
You're right, Andy, that FDR used the fireside chats to calm us during the Great Depression. Trump today has his version of fireside chats, certainly a lot of flames around his speaking. But because of those modern communication elements, social media, Twitter, Facebook, everything he says goes viral. And in a great extent, this empowers the president, but it also checks the president because there's now more criticism online. Everything he says is scrutinized beyond belief. Andy, being president today may look like it makes you the most powerful person in the world, but maybe more of a pitiful, helpless giant.
Well, we know that, the checks that you talk about that are laid out in the Constitution, where Congress, or in some cases the Supreme Court, can check executive authority. But we know really the most important check is public opinion, and we can measure that through polls. We can also measure that on election days. And if the president is not able to shape public opinion, it can really restrain the powers of the executive branch.
Andy, when I was a young boy, my teacher always said, Danny, when you grow up, you can be president. And I always kind of thought, well, that'd be kind of cool. During this crisis, who would want to be president? We're the two teachers. No fancy words.
You can't leave on what?
No fancy suits.
There's a lot of people who'd want to be president during this time, Dan. There's a lot of people who would want to be president.
Now,
but you're right.
In all this?
In all of this, yes, there's no shortage of people who would want to be president in either political party.
Well, you've looked behind the curtain, folks. I guess more people want to be president than I know, although the opposing party has an 80-year-old man.
No fancy suits.
Plain talk about issues you need to know.
Just in time.